small details have been disputed, the core timeline begins with ordinary evening activities and ends with 2 deaths and an investigative disaster. On the evening of May 15th, Aarushi returned home from class and went to bed in her room that night. Her parents reportedly had their normal evening routines as well. The family's domestic helper, Hemraj, a man in his mid-40s and of Nepali origin, was part of the household staff and typically slept in quarters near the terrace. Sometime during the night, exact times are contested, the parents discovered Aarushi's body in her bedroom and reported the crime. Early reports indicated that Aarushi had been killed by a severe cut to her throat, a highly lethal and violent injury inconsistent with suicide and suggestive of homicide. What made the case far more complex at this point was that Hemraj, the live-in helper, was initially missing. Dr. Rajesh Talwar lodged a first information report indicating that Hemraj might have been responsible for the crime, since Hemraj was unaccounted for and had convenient access. In many jurisdictions, domestic workers are often suspects in crime involving family, property, or household harm because of proximity. The father's initial report and the first police response set into motion an urgent search for the missing helper. Police conducted searches, canvassed the area, and reviewed CCTV recordings from the building complex. The home itself became an impromptu crime scene subject to visits by relatives and others before police had thoroughly controlled access. A crucial early failure in the investigation was this lack of immediate cutting off of the crime scene and proper preservation. Family members, neighbors, and the media entered and walked through areas that later contained key evidence, destroying key pieces of evidence. In the early morning hours of May 17th, 2 days after Aarushi was discovered, the decomposed body of Hemraj was found on the terrace of the Talwar family home. The location of Hemraj's body momentarily complicated the initial position that Hemraj had fled and perpetrated the murder before escaping. Instead, Hemraj's body's presence on the terrace raised questions about whether both victims had been attacked at the same time and whether an intruder or intruders had carried out both killings. At the same time, the state of Hemraj's body and the fact that it was discovered in a partially decomposed state after sufficient time had elapsed indicated that he had been dead for some time before the discovery, complicating reconstruction of the precise killing timeline. From the outset, the local police response was widely criticized. Investigators, like I said, were slow to secure the crime scene. The immediate removal of evidence and cross-contamination drastically complicated subsequent attempts to establish a reliable forensic chain of custody for fingerprints, blood splatter, footprints, and other physical traces. Bloodstains were cleaned or inadvertently smeared, bedding and clothing removed before being properly recorded, and CCTV footage was not promptly collected and preserved. Some media coverage targeted the parents, insinuating an illicit motive or something happening in the family. Tabloids amplified rumors about family dynamics and alleged relationships in a way that later commentators and judicial findings condemned as insanely irresponsible. The media frenzy also had a direct procedural impact. Journalists descended on the neighborhood, pressured for access to crime scene photos, and apparently received leaked details from insiders in the police force. As the formal forensic work proceeded, investigators examined DNA, blood splatter patterns, fingerprints, and other traces. Investigators reported blood evidence both in Aarushi's bedroom and in other parts of the house, obviously including where the terrace where Hemraj's body was found. There were claims of blood on the clothing, bedding, and doors, as well as smudged fingerprints and shoe prints in some areas. Some evidence suggested a violent struggle in the bedroom. Other traces suggested post-mortem movement and staging. Importantly, forensic analysts disagreed among themselves on the nature and the timing of stains and on whether certain marks were blood or rust. One recurring point of contention was the origin and presence of Hemraj's bloodstains. Some investigators suggested that the blood traces connected Hemraj to inside areas. Others argued that Hemraj's body had been moved to the terrace after his death, and that the evidence could have been planted or contaminated. DNA profiles from some items matched the victim or familial sources. Others were degraded or mixed and provided ambiguous results. As the investigation progressed, police's narrative shifted in important ways. Initially focused on Hemraj, investigative threads later forced a theory that an intruder might have committed both murders. But as blood evidence and circumstantial facts were re-examined, such as the fact that there was no sign of forced entry whatsoever, the spotlight moved toward the parents, Doctors Rajesh and Nupur Talwar. A secondary police theory emerged that a member of the immediate household might have been involved in the killings, whether intentionally or accidentally, and that the scene had been manipulated to suggest an external intruder. Because of concerns about the local police investigation, the case was transferred to the Central Bureau of Investigation, or the CBI, India's premier federal investigative body. The CBI conducted its own inquiries, collected its own witness statements, re-examined forensic reports, and assembled a case. After months of investigation, the CBI charged the parents with the murders of their daughter Aarushi and the domestic helper Hemraj. The agency alleged that the parents were culpable in a conspiracy to kill Aarushi, and that Hemraj's corpse had been moved and placed on the terrace to frame him or to obscure timing. The CBI relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, certain forensic claims, and behavior analysis to present the case that the killers were these household members rather than intruders. After a long pre-trial period, a trial court in Greater Noida heard the prosecution's case and the defense submissions. The prosecution had failed to establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and that the circumstantial evidence built by the trial court was inadequate. Throughout the litigation, forensic experts debated key pieces of evidence. Critics, of course, argued that the initial police failures destroyed the chance of reliable forensic evidence. Two recurring issues were the interpretation of bloodstains allegedly indicating the crime in specific locations and the presence or absence of foreign DNA on the murder weapons or clothing. Because multiple people had accessed the scene before forensic sealing, investigators and advocates on both sides argued their competing stories. The acquittal produced an uproar among segments of the public. Some groups condemned the court, citing moral intuitions about parental culpability, and others hailed the decision as a vindication of the accused and a critique of the prosecution's overreach. The media remained intensely interested. Many retrospective accounts criticized earlier sensational reporting and highlighted the tragic human costs of trial by media. Families who had lost loved ones in similar cases and advocates for victims debated whether the legal outcome represented justice or failure. The Talwars re-emerged into private life under the continuing glare of public curiosity. For the Talwar family, the years of accusation, incarceration, and litigation, of course, was a heavy toll. The parents lost significant portions of family life, endured jail time, and carried the stigma of public suspicion for years, even after their acquittal. For Aarushi's extended family and community, the grief of a lost child was compounded by the prolonged public spectacle that followed. Hemraj's family likewise suffered in the wake of contested reporting and the unresolved nature of his death. Whether he was an assailant who died in the course of a crime or himself a victim of homicide remained a cause for controversy. The lives of those close to the case, witnesses, legal professionals, and neighbors, were reshaped by the time and trauma involved. Over a decade after the killings, certain factual questions remain disputed and unanswered. Who killed Arushi's name wrong. They called her like some other complete different name, which that clip circulated around India, of course, which just showed that they didn't obviously care as much as they should have cared, and that was just a very gross, insane mistake to make so publicly about such a public case. But yeah, I don't know what I think. The fact that there was no sign of forced entry is odd, but I also think it's even more odd for parents to kill their own daughter, or for one to do it and the other to be complicit, to not say anything. The only thing I could find for motive was that Arushi's little middle school boyfriend had said that Aarushi said that her dad was having an affair, and then people were like, oh, maybe she found out and then told him and then he killed her. But I just thought that was kind of ridiculous, so I didn't even include it because, first of all, that affair was never confirmed, and also I just think that would be crazy. It doesn't make any sense. But yeah, I hope that you guys did enjoy tonight's video. If there are any other cases you would like me to cover in the future, please